Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Stephen King podcast. This is bonus episode number 26, and I have with me today a special guest, a writer and a writing teacher, Nina Munteanu. Did I get that right?
You did. Well,
semi-right.
Semi-right. No, no one gets it right. Even I don't get it right.
So try now.
So I say Munteanu, which is even not correct. It's meant to be Munteanu. It's a Romanian name. Munte means mountain. Anu means from. So Munteanu.
You should just change your last name to Mountain.
Yeah, I know. So I kind of anglicized it, and then a good Romanian colleague of mine, right on a radio show, her radio show, corrected me. She said, "Nina, you're not pronouncing your name right." So from then on, I kind of tried to pronounce it right and tell other people to pronounce it that way. But to be honest, I just say Munteanu.
Fair enough. It's your name. You get to say it the way you want.
You're right.
Exactly. Right. Okay, so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Obviously, I'm Romanian. My dad's Romanian. My mom's German. And I was born in a little town in Eastern Townships, Quebec. The youngest of 3 kids, and I used to follow my brother and sister everywhere, all over the place. I was, the little kid, right? And I was the entertainer as well, somehow. So I was the one who was creating these radio plays and various stuff, and I got them to act in them, so I became the director. And that was a lot of fun. I started writing at that point. That's actually when I started writing.
Wow.
I used to go into this little store somewhere on Main Street in Granby. It was a little store called Williams Store, and it was one of those catch-all stores, right? Cigarette store, I guess, something like that. And it had
variety store,
a comic stand at the back in the corner. And I would sequester myself there. And I was, how little kids are, they hide and they think that nobody sees them, but in fact, everybody does. But they think they're okay. So I was hiding from the store owner and reading all the comic books.
Right.
So I wasn't much of a reader, when I was a kid. My brother and sister went through the Hardy Boys and what's that girl?
Nancy Drew.
Nancy Drew, thank you. And all those mysteries and stuff for kids. And I didn't read. I read comics is what I did. So I'd sit there not realizing that was going to be the impetus and the inspiration for me to start writing.
Very good. And moving on from that stage of your life, did you become an avid reader then of books?
Only when I kind of grew up.
Oh, okay. So
I was really bad, and I was a poor speller. I couldn't spell at all. I don't know if you had in your school spelling bees where they set up captains and everybody gets picked. Well, I got picked last. Honestly, I couldn't spell laugh. I spelt it LAF. I was terrible, and I did. Reading really. Folks out there, reading really helps your spelling, by the way. But then when I did start reading, late in high school, obviously in college as well, I became a prolific reader. I was reading 3 books at the same time.
Wow.
Usually nonfiction, heavy philosophy, politics, all kinds of stuff. Karl Marx books, all kinds of politics and sociology books, science books. And then I got into fantasy and science fiction. So I'd be reading all these things. And I read all the classics too, Thomas Hardy. And so I basically caught up. I really did catch up.
Right. So
that's when
it was just the academic environment that sparked it for you, or?
I think so. I was always interested in things, but I was interested in the world, the way the world was. So I was an explorer. So like I said, as a little kid, I'd go out in nature and poke around. I studied things. I spent a lot of my learning time in a heuristic sense, if you will, learning heuristically by being and exploring and looking. And the reading came later when I settled down, I guess,
Right.
and realized what an incredible world that I had kind of missed in terms of information and storytelling too.
Right.
And I got into the storytelling, and I've never stopped since.
Okay. And so you were reading then, and then what got you going with the writing?
Well, the reading, of course, sparked my writing. I was doing radio plays when I was a little kid already, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was always into storytelling. And as I mentioned, I liked comics. So my storytelling was actually in comics. I wanted to be a comic writer. I wanted to draw comics for a living.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to be a cartoonist or a graphic artist or something like that. And so I told stories through pictures.
Right.
So that evolved into storytelling when I was reading awesome books, novels. So Bradbury, Huxley, Orwell, those types of people writing dystopic science fiction stories with lots of steeped in excellent metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
That got me going. And same thing with the classics, Thomas Hardy, T.S. Eliot, poetry, the metaphor and the depth of that writing
Mm-hmm.
and the sensuousness of the writing just got me going. I wanted to write like Thomas Hardy and Ray Bradbury rolled into one, which
Wow.
is kind of weird
Yeah.
if you think about it.
Yeah.
So maybe I was a little conflicted inside too,
Maybe,
but
yeah.
I was doing it.
Mm.
I was definitely doing it. And in fact, if you look at my writing, there's definitely elements of the two there.
Okay. I'm curious, we haven't touched on this yet, but you're also an ecologist, and I'm wondering how that comes into the package.
Yeah, that kind of came through that whole upbringing in nature and going out in nature. We grew up, the three of us kids,
Mm-hmm.
the family, with our parents in a lovely little town that had a forest in the back.
Okay.
And I was always poking around in there, making magic potions and things out of all kinds of materials and storytelling around that, right? I was I suppose, a little witch of some kind,
Right.
without realizing it at the time, and just really studying nature, how things worked,
Right.
and the wildlife and the interactions of the environmental aspects, the non-living with the living, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And at an early age, even in primary school, I was already thinking about the impacts that we were making.
Mm.
So pollution, essentially, and littering. I was a real advocate for stopping littering and doing something about, all the garbage that we're making. So I pushed recycling as a little kid.
Mm.
Telling my parents they should recycle. In high school or early high school, I was putting up posters. I was bringing in my other talents, if you will, my art and et cetera, and
Mm-hmm.
slogans. And, I wanted to be a commercial artist too. That was another ambition of mine, along with cartooning. So go into advertising, right? So I had these slogans and these, major drawings, and I'd slap them on the wall at the school, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Teachers didn't like that.
Right.
So I got talked to. But so in other words, I got interested in the environmental movement for the sake of the planet and the environment. I was an environmentalist a long, long time ago.
Okay.
When I was a little kid. So that essentially got me moving forward into career move. And I went into science. I was going to, as I mentioned before, go into the arts, and I got accepted, in fact, at university in fine arts program. I got an early acceptance with a scholarship, etc. And then I switched on registration day. I switched over to the sciences, which freaked my parents out. And I said, no, I'm going to fight pollution. And the way to do it is to learn all about the environment, learn biology, learn chemistry, physics, and become an environmental scientist, not just an environmentalist, that's someone who promotes the environment, but to become a scientist in the environments, in the environmental fields. And I quickly went into, I basically learned a lot of ecology and learned all of the major sciences. But I felt kind of draw toward the water sciences. And funnily enough, I was scared of water as a kid. Mm-hmm. And that became a fascination. So this leads to what I'm doing these days, right?
Okay.
We'll talk about that in a minute, I'm sure.
Sure.
So there's my brother and sister again, swimming and running around in the water and teasing each other and et cetera. And I couldn't swim, and I was staying on shore watching the water, right? Same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Looking at turbulence, just like Da Vinci was doing, right? Looking at how turbulence forms and what creates it and what it looks like and all the iterations. And so the fear turned into fascination, and I took limnology on as a career. I became a limnologist. That's someone who studies fresh water in all its iterations, lakes, rivers, estuaries even. Limnos literally means fresh water in Greek, and ology, of course, the study of. So limnologists essentially look at all the iterations of what makes up water. It's not just the water itself. It's everything around the water that it influences water quality and water quantity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And its motion and its physics and biology.
Right.
So physics, biology, chemistry of water, but also of the watershed, the landmass around it, what's going in, what's going out. So we're like water doctors, right?
Mm-hmm.
We bring in all these different disciplines of science and land use, which is sociology as well, to bear when we're looking at water bodies and how they function and how they change. It's really quite fun. So we have to be multidisciplinary.
Right. And that must mean that you must be very disciplined as a writer, because you've got a lot going on and you got a lot of arrows in your quiver to pull from. So your latest book is a diary in the age of water, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that obviously must lean heavily on what you just talked about. Can you tell us what that book is all about?
Sure. In a way, it's following the footsteps of all my previous books, which were mostly science fiction, some fantasy, and they all had elements of ecology in them. You could call them eco-fiction to some degree. Mm-hmm. And eco-fiction simply means the environment eco is short for ecology or ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And in an eco-fiction work, whether it's long or novel, like mine are, the environment takes on a key role.
Right.
In fact, you could even say it's a character. So if you treat it like a character, then it has a major role. And if you pull it out, the whole story falls apart.
Right.
So that's what makes eco-fiction.
Mm-hmm. In a way, this sounds a lot like Dune to me.
Yes. Oh, yes.
You're the bookend to Dune. You hit Dune, sand, you're water.
I'm water. You got it. I never thought of that. Oh, well, to even be slightly compared to Frank Herbert is an honor. That Dune is an incredible work.
Yeah, that's an eco-fiction book or story for sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and everything, when you think about it, everything that's around that is essentially about Dune, which is why, he called it Dune, because it really is about Dune, the planet, the environment, and how everybody interact with it. Mm-hmm. So to go back to my book or my books that led to this one, the environment always played a role. And in the earlier works, like my trilogy, Splintered Universe, or my first two, my duology, Angel of Chaos and Darwin's Paradox, which took place on Earth. The other ones are a space adventure. They all have a lot of world building involved because I'm an ecologist, right? Mm-hmm. I'm like Kynes in Dune. I'm a planetologist, right? Who builds worlds or understands them. Yeah. And I brought to bear, again, as you mentioned, my full toolkit of understanding ecosystems and how they work and how, the planet functions with multi-ecosystems. And they all always somehow wove into the story as an important element in terms of establishing character, how characters relate to one another, how they relate to their environment, and so on, that sort of thing, to build the character's journey. Mm-hmm. And so going from there on to my latest couple of books, the book that I published before Diary is a nonfiction book. It's all about water. It's called Water Is. Okay. And that was a book that I wanted to write as a limnologist since I became a limnologist. I had this idea that I would write a textbook textbook, just like Wetzel. Well, I was a scientist after all, but of course I was a budding scientist. So there's a lot of hubris involved there. So I didn't write the book for a long time. I've done my science as a limnologist for a good 20 years. The other reason I demurred about writing a book about water, I wanted to write a textbook about water for the lay public. In other words, not a textbook, but still a textbook, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
A book that would explain water and all its gorgeous anomalous properties. It has at least, over 70 strange, weird properties that distinguish it from anything else in all its three states, right?
Yep.
Gas, liquid, and solid. So it's different from all other solids, different from all other liquids, different from all other gases. And together combined, it's this weird thing that's everywhere in the universe, literally everywhere, even in the sun. And people, when I say that, people go, no, she's kidding, right? She's pulled that out of her little comic book over there. But it's involved in star building, in, black holes, and it's being shot out of black holes. It's involved in every place where there is going to be life, or is life, or was life. And we're finding it everywhere, literally. Anyway, so this book that I demurred on writing, I demurred on writing it because I was a scientist still. And there's so much that is discussed about water these days that is actually controversial. And some people are calling it non-science, or quasi-science, or crazy science, or
fake news.
Fake news, exactly. Fake news, So I spent a long time thinking, I'm not going to wreck my reputation as a scientist, as a bona fide traditional scientist, by putting this book out, because it would have all kinds of weird stuff in it. Because the Europeans, they're not the only ones, are into this weird stuff, and they're fine with it. But somewhere in there, I decided, no, this is it. This is important. I need to get this out, and it has meaning. So I did, and I took the chance, which there was some blowback on that, on me as a result of it. But this book came out. It's called Water Is, and it's from 12 different angles, if you will, different perspectives on water from all kinds of experts. And some people would call them quasi-experts or whatever, but they're all in there for you to read about. And essentially things like water having memory, things like water having even purpose or intelligence, all these types of very controversial things that are out there are in this book.
Right.
And then it got the ultimate seal of approval, and that was Margaret Atwood liked it.
Well, there you go.
She not only did she like it, but she told the world in the New York Times. The New York Times every year puts out a year in reading. So she was one of the celebrities that was asked, what books did you like? So it appeared as one of the 4 books that she had chosen for that year.
That's pretty heady.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. So I didn't care about the controversy or someone calling me a non-scientist, because it has the science and it has everything in it anyway. But, so that was just a few years ago.
Right. So is my take correct then that you wanted to, because it sounds like water has these pretty amazing properties that, even though your Water Is book was probably relaying very important information, that's probably a little dry for the average layperson. So with your A Diary in the Age of Water, you were going to dramatize those aspects of water and make it more relatable?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I'd roll back and say that even though Water Is a nonfiction book, it's written more like almost like a memoir for me, because I brought in, wherever I'm brought in, I brought in my own personal story. So there's a lot of anecdotes. So every chapter starts with me and my family, and my cat's in there, my kids in there, family's in there, my background's in there, my childhood. So I bring in stories. So it's not as dry, hopefully not as dry as some might think it might be. It's for that reason, it's not a textbook. It's more of more of a
memoir.
Memoir / biography
Okay.
of water.
Oh, cool.
It reads more like that, like personal story.
Right.
And then I get into the what the experts say. So
okay,
hopefully it's that.
So,
but
I guess once Margaret Atwood gave you the seal of approval, did that sort of spur you to do this book?
It did. But so I was really into water after that. I mean,
right.
It wasn't just after that, but I've been really into water for quite a while now, right? As a limnologist and such. So what happened then was around the same time, my publisher in Rome wanted a story from me. And the Europeans, they like to be political, and a lot of sociopolitics are in the stories. It's heavily laden that way. So I wanted to make my short story political, sociopolitical.
Okay.
But I wanted it to be about water. So I decided it needed to have irony, it needed to have tension, it needed to have something weird in it. So I chose the topic of water scarcity in Canada.
Which is interesting because Canada is probably one of the most water-rich countries in the world.
Definitely. So obviously the scarcity results from geopolitics, from things that are going on. All the water in Canada is being stolen in this scenario, in this premise. And in fact, all the things that I came up with, some of those iterations are happening, right?
Right.
I mean, if you think of the water bottling companies that are literally stealing water from certain watersheds in BC and in Ontario, these versions are actually happening on a small scale. So what I do is I just took it to a higher level,
right?
And I created whole countries or whole international corporations that are actually doing it.
Okay.
So in this premise, the states own Canada's water, and China in turn owns the states. And there you go. You've got some weird thing happening. So the premise is, it's the short story that I wrote for my Rome publisher was called The Way of Water.
Right.
And the protagonist is a young lady who's actually dying of thirst. And she's standing there in front of a water giving device, like a water well. But it costs money, right? You have to buy your water. And she has no money left. And she's standing there, literally dying of thirst, right in front of U of T campus where I teach.
Okay.
I made it personal.
Yeah,
so
that's good.
From that story grew legs, and it ended up all over the place. It was published in Rome by Menzione Edizioni in Italian. It was bilingual in Italian and in English.
Okay.
And then it got into a number of anthologies. So it was obviously people wanted that story. That story needed to happen.
Right.
But it just literally, it was a short story about just that one girl. And it totally needed to be told in a bigger way.
Okay.
So that's where A Diary in the Age of Water came from.
Right.
So that book, as the title says, is a diary, mostly a diary. And essentially the diary is of the limnologist mother of this girl in the short story that's dying of thirst. So that connects that. So the story itself is really 4 generations of women and their unique relationship to water. So it spans many, many years.
Okay.
The diary itself spans about 40 years. And then it's framed by a far future time with one of the generations.
Okay.
Before and after. So it starts with this water being called Kyo in the boreal forest that's actually dying. And she discovers this diary. She goes to the library there's a library there where she's meant to learn something to prepare for the exodus. There's an exodus meant to happen from the planet. And she finds this diary of this time called The Age of Water. She learns important things about herself and that time. And then it ends with her again. So the diary is the major part of the book, but it's framed by these so what parts with this water being called Kyo.
So the Kyo part of the story bookends the diary part? Okay, so this is sort of a half epistolary type story then? Or
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
It is.
Interesting. And is this a one-off book, or is it going to be part of a series or?
Oh, you ask a wonderful question. It was meant to be a one-off series,
Mm-hmm.
but it's interesting. Things happened with me and, with the story itself getting out there. And several people have actually said to me, what about Keo? She's not that much in the story, and she isn't. It's a short little frames.
Right.
And they really, really were curious to have more about Keo. And
Okay.
there is potential. There is a lot of potential to have
Awesome.
more about her as a sequel.
Okay.
But I am writing another one, which is, I wouldn't call it exactly a sequel, but it takes place in the same universe as the diary part.
Okay.
And what it does is it focuses on different characters and different aspects of that time period and a different part of that particular story, that world building that's involved.
Yeah. Or you're creating your own waterverse, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I like that. I like that, Lou.
Okay. So this next question I'm going to ask you then, now we're going to turn a little more to your actual craft of how you write. And if you tell me you're a pantser, I'm going to be really surprised because there's a lot of stuff here that you would have to plot out ahead of time or figure out how you're going to incorporate. So are you a plotter or are you a pantser?
Well, you're very right, but I'm actually both.
Okay. All right.
And I think you're finding that with some of your other guests.
Right.
So it goes back and forth, and it matches up with my writing process generally, which involves writing and researching and writing and researching.
Okay.
And as I'm writing a book and as I'm immersed in this particular book, and I'll just use the one I'm writing right now as a good example, it writes itself in a way, but it also begs for more. And then that's where the research comes in. And then that research itself gets plugged in. But something else is happening at the same time. And I call it kind of a gestalt type of synchronicity going on.
Okay.
Where I've opened up my brain and my soul, if you will, my muse to the possibilities out there. And invariably, something will happen that will catch my attention, something in the news, something that I've read, something that's been given to me, something that I experience that becomes a key element that I need to incorporate in the story. Right. So in other words, I draw things to me. Sort of like the universe provides. I ask the universe and it provides me with this and that. And then I incorporate that. So in that way, I'm very much a pantser because I'm waiting for the story to open up for me. But I need to do some plotting at different stages, and I need to step outside of the story to maintain that kind of continuity that a really, really good story with depth, with many, many layers has to have. You can't just do that through pantsing. Unless you're incredibly intuitive and you have it all in your head like Mozart, right?
Right.
If you're not Mozart, then you have to step outside a little bit and look at what is actually going on in terms of the layers, the metaphoric layers that you're building, which includes place and how that place interacts, which I do a lot of.
Right.
So there's a fair bit of, and I wouldn't necessarily use the word plotting as part of that. I think construction or storyboarding or outlining is a better way of suggesting it because it's more than just plot. It's how all the elements integrate into a story with full depth. Right.
Do you know the end of your story when you start?
That's a great question. I usually do, and I want to.
Right.
Having said that, A Diary in the Age of Water was really a different write because I didn't know the end. And I got into it not knowing the end, and it freaked me out. In fact, I had to stop writing at some point when I was writing the diary part. So I had Keo at front and back, right? And the diary was getting me really down. I mean, it shouldn't do that to the reader, but this one character that's writing a diary is quite cynical. And, she's in the hell part of the story, right? She's within it, sort of like, the Diary of Anne Frank. She's right in there, right?
Yeah.
And you're compelled to read. But the writer, which is me, who's writing it, I got really into a funk a couple of times with that. And the only way I could get out was to look toward what is going to happen. And that was shifting in front of me, and it wasn't obvious where it was going to go. As soon as I did figure that out, then everything moved well, but I didn't have it in the beginning. And in all my previous books, I did know the ending. And that just got me going, right? That created that golden thread, knowing the ending, because the knowing the ending is the so what part, right?
Yeah.
And that draws you, just like the light at the end of a tunnel, into a straight line toward it. Makes it a lot easier to write. If you leave that open-ended, that doesn't mean you're not going to write something awesome. It just means that you're going to flounder a little, but also suggests more possibilities. So there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a different process.
Sure.
And it was something that I hadn't done before. So I was really glad that I had. And this book, believe it or not, the second one that I'm writing right now is similarly that way. I don't exactly know the ending. I have an idea of what the ending is, but I haven't connected it with the so what part yet. And I think I'm still learning that so what part.
Okay. I'm curious, given your academic background and your, and especially your background as a ecologist, do you find it difficult to, because I think one of the things that happens to writers is do a lot of research is they fall in love with their research, so they want to include that in their book.
Yep.
Is that something that you have to be on constant guard about? Or do you hope that, I assume beta readers would say, this is interesting, but it's not really helping the story?
Yeah. I hate to admit this, but, well, I don't hate to admit it. I admit it. I don't use beta readers. Use beta readers.
Wow.
So all my works, I self-edit. And then, of course, the editor, the professional editor of the publishing company will continue to do that.
Okay.
And I rely on them for some of that. The way I get around that is I realize that I do it. Every good researcher is going to do that. And I let myself do it. And then I let the whole thing sit long enough so that when I go back to it, I'm reading it as a reader. And then I pull lots out. I always pull a lot out.
Right.
And then I spend time with the story itself. And so I'm going in with different set of eyes, with reader eyes.
Okay.
I'm not immersed in the story per se. And I'm being my own critic. And I'm actually pretty good at it.
Okay.
Because I'm disciplined that way.
Wow.
And the key is to let it sit long enough so that you go in and you go, this is just too much. And I really want to know what so-and-so is doing. So let's get on with it, shall we? So it's like I talk to myself, my other self, right?
Okay. So your left brain, right brain's doing a lot of back and forth.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah. Maybe it has to do with my background. German, Romanian. The German, very disciplined. Nur so, ja, es muss sein. And then the Romanian, no, nicht nomlaska. Yeah, no mai puțin. And then they're fighting each other.
Right.
And then they meet happily over garlic. And then everything's fine.
That's a good one. I like that.
Yeah. I had to learn that.
See, this is why I like interviewing writers, because everybody's got a different process. And the fact that you're not using beta readers just blows me away, because I think you're the first one that said that.
I use garlic.
Yeah, you use garlic. And I'm wondering, well, I guess it depends on the type of characters you're writing in that, because like another big thing that's come along in the last couple of years is sensitivity readers. Like if you're writing about cultures or religions or whatnot that you're not familiar with, or that are outside your normal day-to-day life, that's also become a big thing. How do you handle that?
Rightly so. Well, I do it. I'm doing it. This next book that I'm writing, the one that I'm writing right now, has an Indigenous character in it.
Okay.
And she plays an important character, so I can't pull her out. She's an important aspect of the story, an important, literally, aspect of that story. And she represents something. but she's Indigenous. So comes from a particular location and a particular Indigenous group. And I'm in contact with them, them particularly, to make sure that I do all the right things, that I represent them respectfully. So yeah, that's an important element, and I want to make sure that I get it all right.
Right.
So there are sensitivity readers out there, and there are sites, where they congregate, and I may even use one of those as a so-called beta reader. But I will definitely, my biggest thing is to talk to the original people and make sure that they not so much like what I'm doing, but can agree that I'm representing their culture respectfully.
Sure. As we were talking before we started the podcast, I'm just curious, how has the current climate of the world impacted your writing process and the other things that you do, with COVID and all the social distancing and political situation in the States? As we're recording this, is actually November 3rd. They're going to the polls to vote for a new president.
Yeah.
And the fallout of that will have a big impact on the future of the world going forward. And in this day and age where everything is the most important decision that you're ever going to make, I really do think that this election is a very important milestone in human history. So, like, when COVID started and that, did it have a negative, positive impact, or you just sort of powered through it, or has it changed how you write or work, or like how has it affected you?
In a number of ways, like all of those, funnily enough, it's impacted my writing negatively, but it's also impacted it positively. So, in fact, I write less and I write more.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to be like that. But for yourself, it's a complex thing, right?
Yeah.
In terms of your own lifestyle and what you're doing and what you're pursuing. I teach at U of T, and I teach at George Brown College in Toronto. And so the first thing that happened there was we all went online.
Right.
So that was a bit of an impact there, but it worked. And as it turns out, I've been teaching online for years and years before. I've coached people to publication. I taught courses, online courses before, webinars and that kind of stuff. So for me, it was really easy. There was no problem with the transition.
Okay.
And in fact, it made it a lot easier for me. I didn't have to commute, and there were lots of pluses there, actually, to be honest.
Okay.
The negative part of not being face to face with people. Of course, that's nothing like that, right?
Right.
But platforms these days are pretty good, so we're able to get around them.
Yeah, I mean, if this would have happened 10 years earlier, I think things would be a lot worse. But the internet has really saved a lot of people.
Definitely.
Yeah.
In terms of my writing itself, it's funny that this book that I'm talking about, the one that I'm working on right now, it wrote itself. I'm halfway through it right now, and it wrote so quickly. I was really immersed in it, and great stuff. The negative part was I was going to, speaking of Indigenous, I was going to go up to the Arctic. That's where they are.
Right.
And I was literally going to make contact with people and go there and see where it took place, connect with people, connect with Indigenous people, elders, etc., and learn stuff and show them my stuff and go there. I couldn't because the doors got shut, right?
Right.
And rightly so. So COVID has done is I guess it's stopped certain things from being able to happen. And so I've just had to work around them. So one example is I was literally going to drive the Dempster Highway to a specific location. And I was going to bring some friends with me. We were going to take that drive and head off. And of course, we couldn't do it. So what did I do? I used Google Earth. I said, I'm not going to stop this. I mean, obviously, it's not the solution, but it was a way that allowed me to move forward. What I'm getting
very
at.
good.
So when you said, did you, just plow forward? That's exactly what I did. I found ways around the things that became obstacles. And then I went with the things that became a wave that was the case.
Very cool. All right. So at this point, is there anything that you would like to mention that hasn't come up in the conversation?
That I like milkshakes.
Vanilla or chocolate or both?
Chocolate.
Chocolate or strawberry?
No, actually, Lou, you asked some awesome questions, and
great.
I feel really good about it.
And you can find our listeners can find all your stuff at your website, which you have it's called The Alien Next Door, or they can just search on your name and it'll direct them to that site as well.
Yeah, that's actually I don't know what to call it. It's sort of a personal site, The Alien Next Door. That's me. I'm the alien. Next door, the outsider, the writer. And it's kind of a, pop fiction or pop culture and that kind of stuff, my personal stuff. Right. I have two other sites.
Okay.
NinaMunteanu.me is my coaching site and my writing site. I post lots of articles on writing, how to write, tips, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And things about what I'm doing, my appearances and things to do with my books. And then there's my actual book writing site, ninamunteanu.ca, which is all about my books, what I've published, what I've written, those types of things. And then I have one dedicated to my own passion, which is water, and it's called themeaningofwater.com.
Okay.
And so people can go there to find out anything to do with what I'm doing with water.
All right. And are you on any social media platforms?
Definitely. Facebook, Twitter. Twitter, I believe, is the Alien Next Door.
Okay.
Or Alien Next Door, I guess, is my handle. Mostly Twitter and Facebook. I'm also on LinkedIn. Okay. And I guess there's a couple other places where people can find me.
Right.
But those are the main ones.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I want to thank you very much for coming on. I had a blast talking to you. Very interesting background.
Thank you. Same.
And when your next book's done, ping me and we'll do a follow-up podcast, and then we can concentrate more on your books. And since everybody already knows who you are now.
Thank you, Lou. It was a blast. It was good fun.
Thank you very much. You enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.